I thought we'd shift a little bit and talk about assessment. It seems to be the thing that the linkage between the students and ourselves on this. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what your thoughts are when you create assessments for your courses. What types of factors are you thinking about? We have obviously content, maybe skills. We have outside factors that sometimes come in, whether they be core abilities, departmental guidelines, competencies. Maybe you're a sequential class that you think things need to be covered in section A to get to section B. And then how do you communicate to your students the expectations for what they should be looking for and what they want to accomplish in this? So maybe that, both sides of that coin.
I think Carolyn wants to start, so I can. When I do assessments, I do projects, and that can be a written project, it could be presentations, are the two primary things that I use depending on the course and depending on what we're doing. And they can vary in, like, sometimes they're very small, sometimes they're larger. And what I try to do is I keep in mind what the core competencies for the course are, and we have to finish these core competencies by the end of the semester, and that we build. And so if I'm doing an assessment in week 2, it might be very different than in week 5. And an example of my film class, for example, if they're doing a film review, a 4.0 film review in week 2 might be a 1.0 in week 12. And so what I do is I add things to it, I build, and I let students know that what you know right now, this is what I'm grading on, and then next time add this, add that. And I keep, again, let them know what the expectation is. Sometimes I've even said, and students will laugh, okay, on this assessment, all I need to know is that you can document this one thing properly. And I will sometimes give a short assignment in my English 102 classes, and I say, you just do a minimum amount of research, sort of throw something together, because all I want to do is make sure you understand the basic format rules. So don't spend too much time on it. And they also appreciate that. They think it's funny if a professor says don't spend time. But then I'll also say this is really important, critical, and and to keep up that dialogue.
Well, as I mentioned, I teach developmental ed, and so I have a really strong belief that I have to provide a very strong foundation for these students so they can move on to be successful. So my assessments tend to be very formative rather than summative. Formative meaning I constantly want to be checking to make sure they're getting these basic skills. So we have a lot of they're called tasks, but they really are more like quizzes. And we have, starting week 4, we have a quiz every single week. And so in those quizzes, I'm constantly seeing, do I need to go back and reteach this? Do I need to circle back around? Because on that first quiz, they didn't get that first basic set of skills. And then each quiz, each subsequent week, is going to still include a little piece of that, plus, well, here's another harder piece and a harder piece. So it keeps building. So they get a little bit longer. This first one starts out very short. They get a little bit longer, and they get a little bit harder because we're building on those skills. So I don't really do that formal summative until we get to the very end of the course, and that exam absolutely mimics what they've been seeing throughout the whole course. So mine are very, very formative in that sense.
And my assessments, the major ones like exams, are the same for all the business classes that I teach. Like I said before, I bold everything that's on the slides. That entices them to come to class. That's how they're basically going to study. The routine assessments varies by the type of class. So an intro class, where they're learning concepts, all of the assessments are focused on a company that they'll pick, and I'll actually do the research with them to make sure they're learning the concepts in the class and how it would apply in the business world. For an advanced class like a business management, it's how do they apply those skills? So where in some of the assessments, and I'm very clear in the way I describe them in Blackboard to them, and I'll cover what's expected at the end of every class for that assignment that's due before the next class. How they apply those things is what matters. And I really spend time explaining to them what application of principles in the business world means and examples from my 30 years of experience in the business world. So they walk away having a very clear understanding of the expectation of each of those routine assessments. In my intro to pharmacy class, it's very different. I spoon feed them. They're trying to explore if they want to go into the world of pharmacy. So I give them study guides that are the exact test minus the answers. I'm teaching them how to study for pharmacy school with this enormous amount of material. So the approach is a little bit different, but it depends on the class and what the objective of that class is.
Well, I assume that our students more and more coming after they've taken like Diane's class, like so we thank you for preparing the students. You know, I think in the sciences we have a lot of lab courses, and so a lot of the assessment actually is not just like the quote kind of lecture material, but there's a lot of lab activities that then are coupled with some kind of a lab report, something that they need to do after each lab. And so if there's a lab weekly, then there's so I think in science classes, lab courses, there ends up being a lot of assessments. It's the nature of the field. So that means there's something on a weekly basis that probably needs to be done, turned in. And then there might be lab exams to test for the real kind of comprehension of the material covered in the labs. As far as the lecture material, I agree with what others have said. It depends on the course. So yes, I think there needs to be formative assessments as we keep going. So that can be very informal in class. It can take different forms. I like to do a lot of active learning strategies, and so that includes in the past few weeks I've done several like active learning role playing. And so I dragged Crystal knows about these, I dragged my bag of props to class, and everybody is role-playing different things. And by the end of the semester, the students actually, when I give them kind of my informal kind of course evaluation for just their candid feedback that doesn't go to anyone else but me, usually that gets mentioned. So they'll say that they really enjoyed the role-playing, even though at the time they kind of grown and like, what are we doing here? I actually sometimes also make my students sing in class if there's a song that's related to that particular topic. We just had glycolysis and protein synthesis and structured DNA just in the last 2 weeks. But as far as I think in general, it's better to test more frequently than to wait for a huge, pile-up of like, okay, the next exam is going to cover 15 chapters. So I tell my students that one of the worst experiences I had as a student was being in a class where there was 100% final exam in a full 15-week semester course. And so there's no incentive to do anything until the very end. And so that was like just a one-time make or break, 100%. And I just thought, in retrospect, I just felt like, that was probably a professor who was really kind of lazy, who didn't really want to do a lot. And that was just the easiest way, just to show up, talk, and then you're done. No grading, just minimal prep, and then just a kind of a scantron final. So. I think students will learn more deeply if we have a variety of assessments that are not all just like multiple choice. So if the course content may lend itself more to showing us their work, so that we see this kind of step-by-step process rather than just like, well, they're just a good guesser or they just kind of happen to kind of come up with the right answer in a multiple choice test without really actually having a deeper comprehension. And I think the level of the assessments also depends on the course. Is it just a terminal course that they need that may not really be needed for like a follow-up course, or is it a foundational course that's needed for the next level? We owe it to our colleagues who teach the next level courses to really prepare our students the best way. I would hate to be the professor who, who has my students go on to the next class, and then those instructors find out like, did you learn anything in that class? How could you possibly gone to 4.0 and be failing my class? So So of course, we want to really do our students right in the best way possible and set themselves up for success. So I think our assessments need to be fair. They need to be doable. So if the class average is a failing grade, something went wrong. I don't agree, but I live in Ann Arbor, I hear all the time from U of M students in like engineering, class average, my son was like this, he'll say like the class average was 48%. And so then, there's a crazy curve so that, well, that's not okay in my book. That is, what happened to that assessment? How can you have the whole class fail and then you just sort of bump up the grade so that, what does that really mean? What did the students really master as far as the course content that was covered on the exam? So I think the exams need to be fair, but they need to be rigorous and challenging. I think we do them a disservice by making them too easy. If the bar is set too low, they have an unrealistic kind of impression of how well they've mastered the material, and then we are only setting them up for failure and disappointment, great disappointment down the road as they move up to the next level course, either here or when they transfer to a four-year university. So we saw earlier that, I forget what this is, 40%, 41% transfer, something like this. So a lot of us are in the liberal arts transfer area. So I think whatever we design our assessments to be, they need to really be just a cumulative effort to help our students to really master the material to the best way possible. And not just that we would make them happy for the moment. Of course, if we make everything really easy, everyone's happy. And we do know that, I watched the whole video from the last time. Sometimes students will pick classes that are easy so that they can be guaranteed an easy grade, a good high grade. But I think ultimately, I tell my students, you'll feel much better. There'll be a great sense of accomplishment if you really work hard and you really earned a good grade and you really feel like, I really got this. Like I absolutely feel like I know this. That's what I want my students to feel like when they're walking out.
I know we're getting close to the end. I have one more question and then I guess we can open it up. Really building off assessment is feedback, right, to students. So one of the things we often want to know is, how do we know if students have mastered the elements that we've challenged them with? So what role or how do you provide feedback to your students, and how do you work to have students respond to that feedback, right? One of the complaints faculty tend to have is that feedback just seems to go nowhere, right? I gave you this and maybe you got a test score and that was it. The number went in the grade book and we're done. Or I wrote comments on your lab report or an essay and I didn't really have a sense that you responded to that. So if you could speak a little bit on feedback and we'll open it up then after that.
I'll make it fast. I have to be honest, sometimes I think it's very disappointing when I spend time to give feedback, I'm writing, say on lab reports. And then there might be students who just look at the grade and then they're done. Or I'll give out, give back this, say if there's a Scantron quiz and I say, here's a copy of the test, you can come up and look at what questions you missed. It's, no, I'm good, I just needed the score. So yes, that does happen, but in general, I do find, it's like what the students said, they really do appreciate feedback. So in my online classes, I really take time to give a lot of feedback. So it takes a lot of time. So I feel like sometimes it's a struggle with do we want to just kind of get things done in the quickest way possible as far as our duties? Or, how far do we go with just giving adequate feedback? And I feel like sometimes in the traditional classes, some students need more, some students don't need as much, and so it may not really be like a uniform for everyone. Some people kind of need more, so I would tend to kind of discreetly try to reach out, especially to students who maybe didn't do so well. Try to catch them, when we can have a private conversation, because what can you do different? If something's not working, don't keep doing the same thing and expect different results, right? So. What can we brainstorm to come up with different ways so that you can study smarter instead of just harder? But feedback really is important. So either through online, visually, or by email, by in person. It is really
It's interesting, I didn't realize that our technologically savvy generation, at least that's what we give them credit for, didn't know you could click on that little blue call-out thing and read instructors' feedback. So now, in the start of every class, I go into Blackboard and I put something there and I show them how to access my feedback. So that's where I spend the most of my time in a course. It's not grading, it's actually grading their assignments. Providing that feedback takes me a whole bunch of time. So when I provide it, I'll grab students in class, hey, what did you think of what I wrote back to you? And they're like, what? You call them out once, they're going to start reading the feedback. You call them out twice, I guarantee you they're reading the feedback. So it's interactive with me. I spend a lot of time, I kind of expect them to do something with it. For major exams, I spend time going over the exams. Do I go over every question? No. But I run the sheets that shows me what % of the questions were wrong by what % of students, and the ones that are more than 50% wrong, we go back and we review those concepts once again. So those are the best ways I provide to get feedback.
Well, I do the traditional things like writing the comments on their papers and that, but in one of the courses that I teach pretty regularly, we have a 2-hour lecture and a 2-hour lab. And during that 2-hour lab, I make a very concerted effort to touch base with every single student. So if it's a student that's doing very well, it might just be the pat on the back, hey, Michelle, doing great, keep going. And it might be me pulling a paper from last week and sitting down and saying, hey, Crystal, why don't we sit here, let's take a look at this paper and let's work through a couple of these things together. So I'm going to give them some chance to work with me one-on-one. So I try to make a very concerted effort to touch base with them weekly. Another thing that I like to do is once every semester, usually around the middle of the term, I will give them a 3x5 card and I say, I want you to rate yourself. So I ask them to rate themselves on 2 factors. I say, how well do you think you are mastering the content? How well are you learning the content of this course? Rate yourself from 1 to 10. And I'll put a number down. And then I say, now I want you to think about how well you're doing the other pieces of what it takes to be a successful student. Are you coming to class on time? Are you coming to class? Are you coming in prepared? Are you doing your homework? Are you maintaining your calendar? All those small things that we have been talking about. And they rate that. And then I will compare that. And if there's a student who we are like way off base, I'll sit down and talk with them about why they think that and why I think that and how we could maybe get a little bit closer together. So I try to give a lot of different kinds of feedback.
Over the years, I have gone writing less and less on papers when I have that kind of work, and moving more to conferences and individual feedback with students and talking to them. And having lots of conversation, given the, so it's that one-on-one with emails, answering emails promptly if students have questions, reaching out to students, making sure that they know I'm available. Like I've had students who have been missing a week and a half of class because of the flu, what's going around, and reaching out and then making the time where I can sit and catch them up. And because we do a lot of teamwork in my class, and I rearrange the rooms so that they're sitting around tables, sometimes they will get feedback from the other people at their table. And I will often have students say, I'm going to be, I missed class yesterday for whatever reason, but Diane has already caught me up. So building that kind of culture. When sometimes, if a student is having difficulty, the difficulty, if they're having difficulty in my class with some of those things, you were talking about with attendance or jobs getting in the way or whatever, it's probably with all of their classes. And when I pick that up, what I try to do is get them to the academic counselors. And if you haven't, if you're not familiar with the academic counselors, I'll volunteer Dr. Wilson to talk to you after the session. I don't know if you know Dr. Wilson, who's one of our academic counselors, but they do great work with students and can provide a level of feedback that is more global than we can do. But anyway, a lot of times I've got students who are, who drop by my office who, it's a lot of it's personal now.